Hi, my name is Lisa Hudgens, and I'm the Director of the Placement Career Development area. What I'd like to talk to you about today is actually resumes, how to develop a resume, what you need to have on that resume, what it needs to look like. But before I get started, the first thing I always like to tell everybody is that there's not really a right way or a wrong way to develop a resume. Everybody's resume is going to be a little bit different because you have to tailor the resume for you. So it has to be specific to your strengths. So when I develop my, and as an example, when I develop my resume, because I've been out of school for so long, I typically start with my work experience. Some of you in here, however, that are just now getting ready to graduate, you will probably want to highlight that education experience first. Resumes really do count. A lot of times, the resume is the very first thing that an employer will have to see you. That's what they will form their very first impression on. So if your resume is well organized, it's clean, it's clear, it's consistent, it's polished, that's going to give the employer, an impression, and it's going to give them hopefully a favorable impression. On the flip side of that, though, I have viewed resumes that have come in that have had typographical errors, that have had misspellings, that have had phone numbers crossed out and just written on there. And unfortunately, that leaves a first impression with the employer too. An employer takes a look at the resume. This is a document that you're submitting to them that you're hoping to be able to get employment from. And their first thought is if they see one of these resumes that comes in and it does have these errors, it does have these mistakes, they're going to wonder what kind of work you're going to do for them. So a resume really is a very important document. Now, the purpose of the resume is not to get you a job. It can't get you a job. The purpose of the resume is to get you an interview. And by having it clean and clear and consistent, it can help you get that interview. A resume, a lot of times an effective resume should have certain pieces of information on it. An effective resume at a minimum should have your education and any training and experience that you have that's relevant to the job that you're applying for. Really, there's several different factors of a resume, and some of the factors that can make your resume successful are things such as it should focus on skills, it should use action verbs. On a resume, there are no complete sentences. At no time should you ever have, while I was employed, I worked as a cashier for a local restaurant. My main duties were. There should be no complete sentences on your resume. All of your statements should be very short, very action-oriented phrases. It should be easy to read and clearly understandable. And what I suggest is once you develop your resume, once you get it typed, once you've taken a look at it, then let somebody else take a look at it, and maybe let somebody outside of your area take a look at it to make sure that they understand it, to make sure that it does flow, that it is clear. So it's always a good idea to let somebody else have a look at your resume before you submit it. It should be visually powerful and free of gimmicks. A long time ago, and resumes kind of cycle. When I graduated, we used to put personal information on our resume. For whatever reason, everybody's resume started with a heading and was followed by personal information. And the personal information that we used to list was height, weight, marital status, and health. All of that information is considered discriminatory now, and you should not have any of that information on there. Some of the other things that we did as far as gimmicks is a lot of students, when I graduated, would attach a photo to their resume, or they'd actually have a photo imposed on their resume. Some students did a lot of graphics in the side margins, and the thought or the premise then was do something to catch the employer's attention. What we found out today is employers are very busy. They want the information, they want the facts, they want it presented in a very concise manner. So stay away from the gimmicks. Now, some students do choose to use either vertical or horizontal lines, and as long as it's done kind of sparingly, that's okay. Just don't have multiple horizontal lines or multiple vertical lines. A resume, for most times, should be one page. And a lot of times times if it goes to the second page, it's more a matter of editing than it is actually having that much information. Now, that's not to say that you should never have a 2-page resume. If you've been in the work environment for a number of years, or you've held several jobs, you have relevant experience for the position you're applying, don't ever sacrifice good resume or good information on your resume just to keep it to 1 page. But really, a resume should not ever, there should never be a need to go beyond at a maximum 2 pages for your resume. Anything much over 2 pages, you're going to lose an employer's interest a lot of times because they have so many other resumes to take a look at. They might not even finish all of your resume. So 1 to 2 pages is an appropriate length for a resume. The language should be grammatically correct, should be free of any kind of spelling errors or mixed tenses. And I know computers are wonderful, and they do pick up a lot of our spelling errors, but they don't pick up everything. And again, let somebody else take a look at it. If you use the wrong word but spelled it correctly, the computer won't pick that up. So take a look at it. Probably, I've been in my current position for several years, and pretty much my whole time here at the college, I've been in a position where I've reviewed resumes, and probably the single biggest problem I see with resumes actually is in the area of mixed tenses, and that's usually within the work experience area. And what I'm talking about when I say mixed tenses is if you are currently employed, say you're working as a cashier at a restaurant, and that's what you're currently doing right now to provide your income to get you through school, and you're trying to explain those job descriptions. Because you're currently employed, and remember the very first thing I said is that when you're developing your work experience, you use action-oriented verbs. Well, because you're currently working, those action verbs should all be current tense. Whether it's operate the cash register, wait on customers, arrange displays, take orders, those are all current tense. Now, if this is a job that you've held previously and you're still wanting to put it on your resume, then those action verbs would become past tense. Waited on customers, operated cash register, took orders. So watch your mixed tenses. And again, it's really easy to do, especially if you're currently working and you're working in a job where maybe you don't perform every function every day, and so it's really easy to think of that job in past tense. But if you're currently working, you're developing your job experience, under your work experience, action verbs are current tense. Past jobs, past tense. Typically, the style should be formal, without contractions, without abbreviations, and without acronyms. And the reason you don't want abbreviations or acronyms or contractions is because I know there's a lot of industry-specific jargon, and in your field, you might be very, very familiar with those acronyms. I used to work with a federal grant, and federal grants are notorious for having several acronyms. And sometimes I'd go home and I would say something about the JTPA program or DECA or something, and I would lose whoever I was having the conversation with because they weren't familiar with those acronyms. When you submit your resume, even though you know eventually it will go to somebody within that department who is familiar with your skills and who are familiar with those terms, sometimes the first person who receives your resume might be the HR person, the human resource specialist. And if it's a big organization, they might not be familiar with every single, specific acronym or abbreviation for every job that they see that comes across their desk. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to write the resume not for you, but you write the resume for the other person so that when they're reviewing it, that they know what you're talking about. You don't want to leave anything to an employer's assumption. You want it to be very clear, very consistent. That when you have your final product, always print it on high quality resume paper. This is paper you can pick up anywhere. You can go to Walmart, Staples, Office Depot. target and just request or look for, and it usually says resume bond paper. And it's a little bit heavier, a little bit thicker, and it really does make a nice impression when you mail it or when you send it in. And I always tell students to make sure that when you get your resume paper that you get enough so that when you develop your cover letter, that your cover letter and your resume will be on the same paper, so that when you submit the entire package to the employer, it's all very professional and very polished looking. So there is such a thing as resume bond paper. So like I said, when you get to that stage, and it's a little bit more expensive than traditional copy paper, so you'll want to be careful with it. And students always ask, what color should I get? Because it comes in a variety of colors. And there again, that's something that's changed. When I graduated, and again, it was several years ago, the thing at that time was fluorescent colors or neon colors. I mean, there were purples and there were pinks and there were yellows and there were greens. And we kind of moved away from that because it isn't very professional. And we moved away and we moved to the grays and the ivories and the linens and the whites. And that was acceptable and still is. But in my opinion, probably the best resume paper is just white. And I say that because technology has changed. We now scan resumes, employers scan resumes, they might fax a resume, they might photocopy the resume, and the black ink on the white offers the best contrast, and it will fax cleaner, it will copy cleaner, it will scan cleaner. So there again, it's all about presenting that professional image. So, if you really have a strong preference for a buff color, an ivory, I'm not going to say you shouldn't, because again, that's something that's kind of a personal preference. But I'm just saying that black ink on white paper really does offer the best contrast. And there again, you don't know if an employer is going to scan it. We have so many businesses that have multiple offices, and a lot of times they'll scan in a document and then just send it as an email attachment. So there again, it goes back to just providing the clearest image you can to the employer and trying to kind of foresee their needs. The data on a resume should be presented in reverse chronological order, which means that you will start with your most current and you work backwards. So when you're developing your work experience, you start with where you're currently working and then you go backwards. With education, since all of you are at John A. Logan College, you would start with John A. Logan College. And we'll actually get into that a little bit when we're actually looking at the different the different sections of a resume. And that kind of brings me to that point. If you line up 10 different people here and you ask 10 different people the same question about a resume, you might get 10 different answers. That's because everybody has a little bit different idea of what they think looks best or how they think a resume should be presented. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. When you're developing your resume, yes, it needs to be clean, clear, consistent. It needs to be free of any kind of errors. But how you choose to arrange your resume might look different than the other students in here, and that's okay. Again, I've been out of college for a number of years. It really doesn't benefit me to list my education first because that's not what I consider the most important. That's not what I'm wanting the employer to look at first. I'm wanting the employer to look at my experience, my work experience. And that kind of goes into when you are developing your resume and after you've done your heading and you're sitting there and you're trying to determine, should I do work experience? Should I do qualifications? Should I start with education? Think what it is that you feel is the most important, that you think would benefit the employer the most to see. If you are sitting here and you're working towards an associate program in accounting, and all of your work experience has been in non-related accounting areas, then yes, that's what you want the employer to see first. You'll want them to see that you're pursuing a 2-year associate, or maybe you're thinking you're in the transfer, you're pursuing a 4-year bachelor's degree or a 2-year degree in accounting. That's what you'll want to highlight first. That's what you'll want to bring to the forefront. Somebody else in here who is also maybe pursuing a degree in accounting, but maybe they've been in the work environment for 10 years and they've been doing the work, but all of a sudden they think, now's the time I need to go back to get the education to go with my experience. it might be more important to them to highlight their to highlight their work experience first. And that, there again, everybody's resume, even though it's going to have a lot of the same headings on it, those headings are going to look somewhat different. So you need to find the style that's going to work best for you. When you're developing your resume, there are several different headings. And the headings are, the first is the heading, and that is your name. Typically, your name is on a line by itself. Typically, it's 2 font sizes larger than the text, and usually it's in bold because you want the employer to see your name and you want your name to stand out. If you do have a nickname during the interview, that's a good time to introduce your nickname. Typically, a resume is a very professional document, so you'll want your given name on the resume. So you'll start with your heading, then it'll follow by your street address, followed by the city and the state, followed by the zip code, your phone number, and that might be a cell phone, that might be a land phone, depending on what you use. Some people still have both, and if you do still have both, and if both still have voicemails or voice messages, it's okay to give them both numbers. And then because of technology, and a lot of the employers that I'm dealing with are now starting to request that students email their information to them. So if you have an email address, be sure to include your email address too. And this is where I get on my soapbox, and I'll probably kind of restate this a couple times because this is very, very important. When you're developing your resume and you're getting ready to send it out and you're starting to look for that first professional job, you can't leave anything to chance. And voice messages, because of technology, you can get different ringtones, voicemails, you can do music, you can do classical, you can do rap, you can do hip hop, you can do jazz, you can do country. I've called students that have had little kind of rhymes. You kind of go through this little rhyme thing about, you know, if you need to reach me, press this button or go to this, do whatever. Take it from me. This is not the time to have all that on your voicemail. Once you start sending your resume out, you need to make sure that that voicemail is a professional voicemail. It is something that you would want an employer to hear. And the reason I say this is, one, it's all over the news. I mean, last year and the year before, that's all. Anytime you turned on the news, that's what they were talking about, was employment and voicemails and employers calling and listening to those voicemails, and how that negatively affected some of the applicants. Here in Southern Illinois, not too long ago, I'm very fortunate because I've been in my job a number of years. I'm familiar with a lot of the HR directors, and so they'll call me periodically. And we had, an employer had a position, and I had sent 3 resumes or 4 resumes over, and within a day the employer called me back, and she was kind of laughing. She said, Lisa, she said, do you know these students? And I didn't. They had just come in. They'd been referred to me by one of the instructors, so I knew that they met the qualifications of the job. She said, so you've not called any of them or listened to their voicemails? And I said, no, I haven't. She said, well, one of the young men, his voicemail is kind of a really loud rap song on his voicemail. And she said, I kind of smiled when I heard it, when I called him. She said, because I have a teenage son. And she said, I'm used to that. She said, but I know my director, and I know that if he calls this voicemail and gets this rap song, he will not call the young man. He will hang up and he will go on to the next resume. She said, so could you please call him and tell him if he's interested in working for us, he needs to change that voicemail. And what was funny was the week that I got that, and the company that came from was a fairly conservative company in nature, and I could kind of understand it. But then that very same week, another employer from maybe what I would consider a more laid back, kind of more open environment, called me with the very same concern. One of the resumes that I'd sent down there had a similar song, and like I said, I was very surprised. She said, Lisa, she said, please tell him to change it. She said, before I pass this on, he needs to change it. So employers do listen to it. They really do. So again, the resume is the first opportunity, the first impression an employer has of you. if they've looked at your resume and they think enough of it to call you for that interview, don't let something like that voicemail get you caught up. So, think about it. And the other thing is the email addresses. When you're in high school, when you're in college, and especially when you're emailing with friends, there are 50 million different email addresses out there. I know I've responded to Chicky Baby, I've responded to Glitter Princess, I've responded to Superman, Superhero, Superwoman. Those are fine. I have no problems responding to them, but an employer does. And so you don't want to set up a negative again before the employer sees you, especially if the employer is going to have me or have the student email them directly. When they type in that address, you want that address to be a professional address. So please, as you're setting up your heading and you're getting your resume, take a look at those voice messages. Make sure they're from you, make sure they're professional, make sure there's something you would want an employer to respond to, whether it's your voicemail or your email. And that's my soapbox, I promise. The next section that may or may not appear on your resume, and again, this is something that's kind of cycled. When I graduated, we did not have a job objective. If you do use a job objective, it falls right underneath your heading. And a job objective is a very short, very brief statement outlining what your career goals are. And it's half dozen one way or the other. Some employers say, oh yeah, I read them. Some employers say, no, never look at them. So if you choose to put a job objective, that's fine, it's your discretion. I typically don't put a job objective on my resume simply because I've got enough information and I'm scrambling looking for additional room. So my resume, my current resume does not have a job objective. You might feel very strongly and you might want one on yours, and that's fine. Again, the job objective is a very brief statement outlining your career goals. You have to be very careful with your job objective though. If you make your job objective too generic, it's not going to say anything. And one of the job objectives that I'm used to, it's like, it's one that I saw, it was to obtain employment in an environment where I can apply my knowledge of education and exercise my analytical and interpersonal skills. It really doesn't say anything to anybody about anything that you can do. Everyone in here could actually use that job objective. So to me, it's just a waste of time, it's a waste of space. Something that's a little bit closer to might be a healthcare administrator in a hospital or clinic setting. As an employer, I know exactly what this person is wanting to do. Where you don't want to get too generic, too general, you also don't want to get too specific either. Because one resume that I looked at said the job objective was simply pediatric nurse. Is that an okay job objective? Yes. Is it something that you could use? Yes. But if you're the person and you're the one who's developed your resume, and that's ultimately what your goal is to be a pediatric nurse, as an HR person, I can't read your mind. I'm looking at your application, I'm looking at 25 others, and 25 others say something like, to utilize my professional abilities to obtain a position in the field of nursing. It's pretty much wide open. And then I get to yours and it says pediatric nurse. I immediately think, well, the only job we have right now is in oncology or geriatrics. I'm not even going to call this person because she just wants pediatrics. Well, maybe that person does ultimately want pediatrics, but they're willing to get their foot in their door and they're willing to take this position in these other areas. But I don't know that. As HR, I can't read your mind. I don't know that. So if you choose to use a job objective, again, it needs to be clear and consistent. Don't have it so generic that it does no good. Don't have it so specific that it actually cuts you out of being considered. So just keep that in mind if you choose to use a job objective. Like I said, you might get to it and think, I don't need to use a job objective, I don't want to. And that's fine. Again, that's one of those things that have kind of cycled around. Now from here, everybody's resumes may take on a little bit different twist. The headings will be the same, but how you develop them, what order you choose to put in them, or which orders you choose to put them in will vary somewhat. The next section that might be entitled work experience. And work experience is, it can be paid or unpaid work experience. It could be a hobby. We have a lot of students who do photography, and they do weddings, and they do graduations, or anniversary parties, and it's not really anything that they get paid for, but they go in, they're good with photography, and maybe they're going into some kind of a creative field, maybe they're going into advertising. They could list that as work experience. Or it could be extracurricular, or school activities could fall under work experience. But when you develop your work experience, again, like your you start with your most current. Example, if I'm currently working at John A. Logan College, so I would put John A. Logan College. And when you set up your education, it's important to remember to keep everything consistent. So I would start with the name of you'd start with the name of the employer, followed by the city and the state, followed by your dates. And when you list your dates, it needs to be month and year to month and year. And then from your dates, your job title, and your duties. Now you noticed I just said city and state. You do not need to put the street address. In fact, you should not put the street address on your resume. You don't put the telephone number, you don't put the supervisor's name, and you don't put the reason why you left. Now that information you're going to need eventually, because it usually appears on the application. But on your resume, you don't need that information. It's simply the employer's name, the city, the state, the dates of employment, your job title, and your duties. And so you would set it up, John A. Logan College, Carterville, Illinois, month and year to month and year. My current title is Director of Placement and Career Development, and then I would start listing my duties. And when I'm listing my duties, I need to remember I'm currently employed, I'm currently doing this, so I need to keep all of my action verbs in current tense. So one of the things that I do is I supervise the coordinator of career counseling. I supervise the administrative assistant. I work with area employers to develop jobs. I meet with students to develop resumes, all current tense. The job that I had here at John A. Logan that I no longer have was actually the coordinator of job development. So instead, because it was at John A. Logan College, instead of listing John A. Logan College again, I would simply beneath that list coordinator of job development. Again, I would list the dates, and then I would list my duties. I'm no longer the coordinator of job development, so when I do my action verbs, all of my verbs are past tense. And as a coordinator of job development, part of what I would do is actually, I attended, different clubs and organization meetings. I worked with faculty. I assisted in mock interviews. Again, those are all past tense action verbs when I'm developing my job description, or when I'm developing my work experience. And I know that students always wonder, well, how far should I go back? How many jobs should I list? I've been at the college for a number of years, so I've had probably 4 jobs within my position, or within my career here at the college. So I wouldn't go any further back than John A. Logan College. When I first graduated and I was first looking for employment, when I first got the position here, I would have listed John A. Logan College, followed by the VA Medical Center, followed by Blue Cross Blue Shield, because those were my last 3 jobs. And as far as how far years to go back, there's not a set answer. Because my experience here at the college, I go back 25 years. And that's a long time. If you're a recent high school graduate, or you're going to be a recent college graduate, maybe you've not had a lot of work experience, maybe your last 3 jobs. That's the nice thing about developing resumes today. You can get on the computer, you can develop your resume. I think it's always best to develop it, take a look at it, and then go back in and make any changes that you might need to. So, just develop it, take a look. Like I said, if you've been with a company for 10 or 15 years, you probably don't need to go back much beyond that. If you have been with a company maybe 3 or 4 years, and you've been with 3 or 4 companies, and each one for 3 or 4 years, you'd probably pick up all 3 or 4 companies. Again, it really depends on what your resume looks like and the other information that you're wanting to put on that resume. Once you get your work experience done, then it might be followed by the section on education. And education, again, you would start with your most current. Since you're all currently enrolled at John A. Logan College, you would start with John A. Logan College, followed by the city and the state only, Carterville, Illinois. Again, no street addresses, no phone numbers. And then after the city and the state, you could list, you need to list your degree. Again, no abbreviation, so it's not an AAS or an AS or an AA. It's Associate of Applied Science, Associate of Science, Associate of Arts. Whatever your degree title is, you spell it out, followed by your major. And again, no acronyms, no abbreviations. Spell out because even though everybody here at John A. Logan College knows that CIS is Computer Information Systems and CADD is Computer Aided Design and Drafting, not everybody in the market environment knows that. So you need to spell everything out completely. No abbreviations, no acronyms. Once you get that, then however you decide to set up your dates is up to you. You can set your dates up either, say you're doing your resume and you know for certain that you're going to graduate May 2010. You might just put May 2010. If you just started the program and you started in August 2009, you might put August 2009 to present. It really depends on how you want to set it up. We have a lot of students who come to school part-time, they're working full-time, it takes them a little bit longer than the 2 years to get their degree, and that's okay. And they don't want to put that they've been here for 4 years because they don't want an employer to think, oh my gosh, it took me 4 years to get a 2-year degree. So under those circumstances, you might just put, your expected graduation date. And you can put to be awarded or expected. And again, with computers, if you get to that expected date and you see it's going to take you one more semester, just go in and tweak it and change it and print out some new ones. But again, you start with your most current education, you work backwards. Now, I have had a couple instances where we've had students that have been dual enrolled. They may be attending SIU, or maybe they're attending Mid-Country or Mid-Continent, I'm sorry, and they're doing a program through there, and then they're also attending and taking some of the classes at John A. Logan College, and they expect to actually finish up both programs at roughly the same time. You would put the higher of the degrees first. So you would list, like Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, Illinois, you would list, again, your degree and your major, and then the dates. And again, if you're expected to graduate May 2010, you could just put expected May 2010. So you start with your most current and you work back. Because you're at a community college level, we really don't need to include our high school. If for no other reason a high school really dates, it's because you do put the degree or the date that you received your degree. And so really, if you're at a college level, most employers are going to assume that you either have a high school diploma or that you have your GED. So it's really not necessary that you put that information on your resume. And most people are trying to find additional space, and that's just something that you can leave off, and it really will not affect your resume. Other sections that you might have on your resume, if while attending John A. Logan College you received any the President's Award or the Vice President's Award, or you're inducted into any of the honors sororities or honor fraternities, go ahead and list those. And you might have a section. You might have your name, your address, and all of that information. You might have job objective, education, then you might have honors, because what you try to do on your resume is lump any sections that are related together. And so since your honors are related to your education, you would want to maybe put those together. And again, the honors, you would list the awarding organization, which would be John A. Logan College, the award, and then the date that it was awarded. And again, that's something you may or may not put on your resume. And again, a resume is like anything else. It needs to be updated, it needs to be current, and it's always a work in progress. So you might, as you're, once you get into the work environment, once you gain more experience, and you go in and you tweak your resume, the first thing to come off might be the honors. There again, it just varies, and everybody's resume is a little bit different. Other sections that you might have sections like any certificates or licenses A lot of our programs, like in our administrative assistant program, they have OPEC testing. Automotive, they have the ASE certification, and I know I'm using acronyms now. On the resume, you would not, you would actually spell those out. But if you have any certificates or licenses that are relevant to the position you're applying for, you'd want to list those too. And you could just have certificates or licenses and then list them. And then list the awarding agency and the license, and make sure that it's a license that is in fact still current. Other sections, professional memberships, that might be something that you don't have on your resume today, but once you've been in the work environment, because I know when I graduated I didn't have any professional organizations or memberships. After I'd been in the work environment for a couple of years, I had to go in and kind of retweak it, and I took off some of my college information and added some of the professional memberships that I was now a member of, because it was more relevant to the jobs that I was applying for. It was more relevant to the job that I was currently in. Other sections, special skills. Again, when you're setting your resume up, you need to set it up so that everything kind of falls together. So since you are all still in school, and I'm making an assumption that probably all of you will start after your heading. You may or may not have the job objective, but all of you will start with your education. You might have education, special skills, honors, or education, special skills, licenses if they're related to your degree that you're going. And then and under special skills, and I always ask students, what special skills do you have? And students say, I don't have any special skills, but we do. Special skills can be if any of you are fluent in any foreign language, whether it's Spanish, French, German, whatever. If you're fluent in it, if you can, and some students say, well, I can speak it and I can understand it, but I can't write it. That's okay. Just write. Just put ability to write Spanish fluently, limited, or ability to speak Spanish fluently, limited writing skills. Whatever you put on your resume, though, you need to make sure that you can back it up, because employers more and more take a look at the information on your resume, and if you say you can speak Spanish, then you need to be prepared. I had a student that actually went for an interview, and he had listed on his resume that he could speak Spanish fluently, and he said he was very, very glad that he could, because the interviewer came out, sat down, started the interview with hola, and continued the entire interview in Spanish. So, you know, had he not been able to speak it fluently, it would have been very obvious to the employer very quickly that he had maybe misrepresented some of the information on his resume. So if you say you can do it, you need to back it up. So it might be a foreign language skill, it might be American Sign Language, it might be software programs. Don't just put software programs, you need to be specific, whether it's Word 2003, whether it's Access, Excel, Lotus. I had a resume come in the other day that had Lotus. Whatever software, and it might be software that is specific to your degree. I know within the medical administrative assistant program, there's specific software. I know in the drafting program, they have specific software. I'm assuming the graphic design, they have specific. Make sure you list the name of the software package. And even though it might not be the same package that the employer uses, that's okay. Because as an employer, if they take a look and they say, oh, you know Word, and you know this, this, and this, and yes, we use this, but this is really specific to what we do. If you've got those skills that you can grasp this program, you're going to have the skills to grasp my program, my software program as well too. So don't be afraid to list those software programs. If you're familiar with different hardware, if you're very, very comfortable with an IBM or a Mac, list IBM or Mac, because you don't know what computers employers are using. So if there's certain computers, list that information, but be very specific. If you have an outstanding typing score speed, you type 90 words a minute, or your transcription or your dictation speed is fast and you've tested, list those. But again, just don't list ability to type. That doesn't tell me as an employer anything. I need to know your actual typing skills, so just go ahead and list that. You know, I still get resumes in, and it kind of makes me cringe when I do, that still have driver's license information, social security information, social security numbers. I have gotten resumes, not as many lately, but I still get them that state married, single, divorced, 3 children, ages 16, 18, and 22. As an employer, I don't need to know that information. I don't want to know that information. That information is discriminatory. Don't put any personal information on your resume. There's no need for that information. Now, once you're hired or once you fill out the application, then they might ask for a social security number. Even there, it's kind of iffy. So don't put any personal information on your resume. You really don't need it. And a lot of times, employers will file 13 if they get it, simply because they don't want to be accused of being discriminatory in nature. So please don't put any personal information on your resume. And I know I've listed some of the different headings. We've got the objective, we've got the work experience, we've got education, honors, certificates, license, professional membership, special skills. Again, those aren't this isn't an all-inclusive list. Actually, I've seen resumes that have a qualification of skills, different headings, and it's okay. Everybody's resumes in here is going to look a little bit different. As long, again, and I know I keep repeating myself, as long as it's 1 to 2 pages, as long as it's very clean, as long as it's very clear and it's consistent and it's concise, it's okay. And part of what I'm talking about when I say consistent is when you're developing the headings. The headings are actually spelled out. You won't have heading with your name spelled out, but if you use a job objective, you'll have job objective, and then you'll list your job objective. You'll have education, then you'll list your education. You'll have work experience, and you'll list your work experience. If you start out and job objective is in all caps and it's bolded, then every other section title in there needs to be all caps and bolded. If you started out and it's all lowercase but it's bolded, then every section in its section heading needs to be lowercase and bolded. When you develop your work experience, set it up exactly the same. If you've got 4 different work experiences that you list, they all need to start with the name of the company, the city, the state, the dates of employment, the title, and then the duties. And the dates need to be consistent. If you start out doing a spelling out month to year, and you spell out March to April, then every date under work experience needs to be that same format. And that's what I'm talking about when I say it needs to be consistent. Now, once you get done with your resume, and again, it will be 1 to 2 pages, you will have a separate sheet. It used to be on the bottom of your resume, you'd see that little blurb, references available upon request. That's kind of something else that is kind of cycled off the resumes. Some people insist on keeping it on there, and that's fine, but a lot of times you might as well just take it off, because an employer is going to assume, if I want to references, you're going to provide them with me. Not all employers want to see your references immediately. Some will ask for a resume, some will ask for a resume and references. You need to be prepared. So on a separate sheet, you need to have a list of references. And what I recommend to students is, because you don't use staples or paper clips, and you don't put it in a binder, you typically just mail your cover letter and your resume together. Sometimes they do get separated, and your references so you might have a cover letter, your resume, and then your list of references. Your name and phone number should be on every piece of documentation. Again, because if they get separated, they can get back together. So when you develop your references, what I recommend to students or recommend to individuals is, whatever heading you use for your resume, carry it over and use that exact same heading for your reference page. And on a reference page, you need to have a minimum of 3 references, preferably people that can talk to your skill level or to your education or to your dependability. People who typically make good references are former or current supervisors, former or current faculty, co-workers, somebody, if you've been a member of a club or an organization, especially if you've held any kind of a leadership role in that, somebody that has worked alongside you in that club, somebody that can say, yes, if you give her a project, she's going to get it done, it will be done on time, and it will be done well, she always shows up. Somebody that can attest to all of your skills or your experience. But before you list somebody as a reference, do yourself a favor, call that individual, ask them if it's all right, because maybe, and I'll kind of give you an example. I had a student that was very unhappy. She had had a particular instructor and thought she had a very good relationship with that instructor, and she did. They had a very good rapport. But the student had a problem of getting to class on time and was typically 5 to 7 minutes late before each class period. Not a big deal, but she was still late. This instructor was very meticulous on her time. The student knew that she had done good work in the instructor's class, knew that she had this good rapport with the instructor, used this instructor without first getting her permission. What happened was, when the employer called, and a lot of times it is the very first question out of the employer's mouth is, you know, were they there? Were they there on time? Can you tell me about their attendance? The instructor was honest and said, yes, she was here every day, but she was never here on time. And that, in fact, is what kept the student from getting a job. So before you use somebody as a reference, call them, ask them, make sure that they will give you a good reference. You want to know what they're going to say about you before they say it. And besides that, it's just common courtesy. You don't want to catch somebody off guard. You want to give them an opportunity to, maybe they'll feel that they need to decline. Maybe they don't feel that they can give you a good reference. You want to know that before it happens. So when you're developing your resume, again, your resume should be 1 to 2 pages and then a separate sheet of references. And if you have any other questions, you can always contact me. Again, my name is Lisa Hudgens, and I'm located in the Placement Career Development Office in room C207. Thank you.